Hey everybody, Garry Adelman, American Battlefield Trust again. Happy to be back. This will be among the last videos we're going to shoot and post for this day, July 2nd. This is Gettysburg 157. Please make sure you share this with your friends on Facebook. Go check out our YouTube channel where we're posting a whole lot of videos as well. And we got a couple of guests to talk about some actions that people don't talk a whole lot about, or they've been reduced down to a cliche. We're going to unpack those. In other words, we're not talking about Little Round Top, Devil's Den, the wheat field, the peach orchard. We're talking about the Cadore Swale and Cemetery Ridge and the Valley of Death maybe a little bit at the end. Yes, we're going to close out the second day on the south end. In other words, the last gasps of the largest attack at Gettysburg. We are talking about Longstreet's men. Hood is already all spent. Now McLaws' men are coming to the end, and there's going to be another division going in. Let's unpack all that. Let's start with Chris Mackowski, emerging Civil War, and an all-around good guy.
So we talked about the loss of Sickles at the head of the 3rd Corps. Winfield Scott Hancock assumes command as left-wing commander for the Union Army, and he's going to have to try to patch together the crumbling line of the 3rd Corps as William Barksdale's division has smashed forward and really pushed the 3rd Corps off of the peach orchard and back toward the line where they should have occupied. Among the folks that Hancock is going to turn to would be the brigade of George Willard. And these are men who are looking for some payback. They were among the forces that were captured at Harper's Ferry during the Antietam campaign when Stonewall Jackson scooped them up. Regiments actually fled from the field at that point. After they were paroled, they end up in the defenses of Washington, cooling their jets and trying to just sort of redeem their reputation. But now here on the battlefield, they finally have the opportunity for that redemption they've been longing for. So Willard's going to lead his men in and try to counterattack against Barksdale's forces coming in this direction. Barksdale was among the Confederates who captured those men from Willard. So they didn't know it, but they've got some literal head-to-head redemption that's going to happen here. One of Willard's aides is going to get shot. Willard himself is going to get shot. And then Barksdale is going to get shot. So what turns out to be a pretty intense engagement out here is going to be enough, though, to buy Hancock time to continue to cobble together this defense. Willard's men do redeem themselves, and they're able to blunt Barksdale's thrust. And I'm going to ask Doug to come on here and talk about one of the most famous stories here as Hancock continues to cobble together that defense.
So thanks, Chris. What we're really talking about here is we try and cobble together this defense. They're band-aiding together a defense as this attack continues to come. And what they're really doing is they're taking an individual battery and supporting it with a single regiment of infantry, and this is probably the best case. This is the 1st Minnesota supporting Thomas's battery. As additional Confederate dominoes come from that far tree line, Wilcox's Alabama Brigade will come from that far tree line. They're going to break through the Rogers House, which is about where we see those 3 trees and the white picket fence. That represents the Rogers House in 1863. As they break through that position, you'd have Winfield Scott Hancock right up to William Colville, the colonel of the 1st Minnesota, and he'll say, "My God, are these all the men you have?" And he's right. It's an understrength regiment. It's only 8 companies, 262 men. They have 1 company up serving at sharpshooters up at Cemetery Hill, others back guarding wagon trains. And he goes, "Yes, sir." He goes, "What unit is this?" He says, "William Colville, 1st Minnesota, commanding." He goes, "Colville, do you see those flags?" He says, "Yes, sir." He says, "Take those flags." There's not a man in the regiment that doesn't know what's being asked of them. Colville will salute and say, "Yes, sir." He'll turn to his men and have them fix bayonets, and then he gives the order, "Guide center, forward march." And the 1st Minnesota will march down into this field until they get to that fence. They'll push it over, and then they'll go to a trot, and then a jog. And when they get 25 yards prior to where we see that growth there at the bottom of this ridge line, they'll deliver a volley, and with a Yankee hurrah, they'll charge into the Confederate line. So vicious, so unexpected was this counterattack, those Confederates are stunned. But 262 against 1,600 are not good odds. Now, ultimately, they will get a little help from some of Willard's men on their left. They'll get a little bit of help from the 19th Maine on their right. But by the time the 1st Minnesota gets back up on this ridgeline and they take a head count, they have 47 men. That 82% loss is arguably it's the highest percentage of loss of any regiment here at Gettysburg, and arguably the 2nd highest percentage of loss in any regiment during the American Civil War. When we think about, hey, come to Gettysburg, stand where these men stood, and then we say, suspend that you know how it turned out. Because at 7:10 in the evening on July 2nd, 1863, Winfield Scott Hancock rides down this ridgeline and with the sweep of an eye says, "I'm going to burn 215 lives to buy 5 minutes. What's your life worth?" And so therefore we have this opportunity to sketch the whole idea of the burden of command. Omar Bradley would later on write, the agony for commanders in war is not in its dangers or deprivations, or in the fear of losing, but in the knowledge with each new day men's lives must be spent to take that day's objectives. Hancock felt that. Now, ultimately, we also know Napoleon would say the moral is to physical is 3:1. That's physical, 1600. 262, full of will. They charge down this ridgeline and they buy 5 minutes of critical time that the Union line might respond to all the other events taking place here. Now, what we'd ultimately have is additional dominoes are coming up from the south. We'd have now men from Florida, and we'd have men from Georgia starting to penetrate or come across these fields and run into the Union line. And ultimately, I'm going to hand that off to Chris to pick up the story.
Because here's where things really start to break down for the Confederacy. We've been talking about the 3 finest hours that any army has fought on any battlefield. That's what Longstreet described his attack as he's coming up from the south. But now it's time to hand the attack off to A.P. Hill. So Doug talked a little bit about Cadmus Wilcox coming off. Wilcox is with Richard Anderson's division. Anderson is newly reassigned to the newly created 3rd Corps, so they're still working out the kinks on how all that command structure works. Now, ideally, Doug talked earlier about how the Confederate 1st Corps is a well-honed fighting machine. It's been unaffected by the Army reorganization. Richard Anderson had been with the 1st Corps, so perhaps we might envision a smooth handoff here. But in fact, Anderson completely abdicates his responsibility, doesn't even come onto the field where he's commanding men. And so of his 5 brigades, only 3 of them are actually going to get into action. One's going to get lost, and one's going to refuse to go forward, saying that General Anderson told me to stay here and hold this position until ordered forward. And one of Anderson's aides says, I'm from Anderson's headquarters. I'm ordering you forward. And little Billy Mahone says, I'm not moving until Anderson gives me personal orders. And so we start to see this breakdown in command take place. A.P. Hill, who should have been on the field, taking charge, making sure that this transition happens, is back behind the line sulking. He does nothing to make sure that this attack continues forward. And so, even with the power that Longstreet's attack has had, coming from the south, rippling up with those dominoes that Doug has talked about, and the dominoes start skipping at this point because of a lack of smooth Confederate leadership. And we're going to see this massive attack begin to peter out right here along Cemetery Ridge. I'm going to ask Garry to come back in because we're now getting to the evening of July 2nd.
Good. Thanks, Chris. And, let me just say that, while this is going on, this is part of Longstreet's general movement. So around when this is happening, you also have, remember, those Confederate troops who fought their way through the wheat field, they fought their way through Houck's Ridge. They are starting to move up toward Little Round Top and the Valley of Death. We are talking about like Wofford's Brigade, Kershaw, Semmes, and Anderson that are moving actually into the Valley of Death, but they've got nothing left. And the Yankees have more reinforcements coming up in the form of the 6th Corps and the Pennsylvania Reserve. So they will be pushed back. The Confederates here will be pushed back. And here you have it. Chris was just talking about the handover between Longstreet's Corps and Hill's Corps. So let's look at this. We've got the Confederates have 9 divisions here. 2 of them are out of play. Pickett's not here yet. Heath's division had been so wrecked the day before, they're out of sight and out of mind. So that leaves 7 on the field, okay? You got Hood attacking, you've got McLaws attacking, and then you've got half of Anderson attacking, okay? What's interesting there is that you have a breakdown. Wright attacks the Georgians, but Posey's Mississippians, and then Mahone's Virginians, if they were even ever ordered to attack, they never went forward, okay? And then you have Pender's division. Pender, by that time, I believe, has been wounded at that point. It will prove mortal as well. Pender doesn't move forward, and that is going to affect Robert Rhodes, who also doesn't move forward. He doesn't have the support, and he thinks it's a dangerous assault. Who's next to Rhodes? Jubal Early. He does attack. Who's next to Early? Edward Johnson. That's on the night of the 2nd. This is East Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. They will attack as well. So what you have is a large Confederate movement here, a smaller Confederate movement over there, but nothing going on in the connection there. And it looks like it was supposed to, from what we can tell from the order. So you have this Confederates not using all their strength, being on an exterior line. I'm trying to get to a place where the sun isn't so bad, and they're really not using all the troops they had. I don't know what difference it would have made, but here you have it. The 2nd day ends. You can say the Confederates have gotten the peach orchard and that they temporarily gained other positions, but you know what? The Yankees are still in possession of the ground they want to be in possession of. What Winfield Scott Hancock called the strongest natural position I ever saw. as the second day comes to a close, a few things are happening. One, this is already the bloodiest battle in American history, okay? Had it ended right there, it would still be close to 40,000 or more casualties, and there's still a night and a terrible day to go at that point. Hancock at some point is asked, you know, if you had to make this order again, order the death or wounding of 215 soldiers again, would you? And he said, absolutely. Because like Doug said, the moral fiber you need, the certitude you need in order to make those decisions and then live with them, not once, not twice, but consistently throughout a 4-year war is what a general has to do. You could be a great administrator, a good communicator, and a good horseman, and even a good tactician. That will not make you a good corps commander. What you need is that certitude, that moral fiber. And Hancock was one of the few that has it. It is not surprising that many people rose up to the point of Corps Command or Army Command and just petered out at that point, the Peter principle that Doug loves to talk about. There's going to be a council of war that night on the Union side. Famously, Meade gathers his trusted generals together. They decide to stay at Gettysburg. They decide to stay and fight it out, let Lee attack them the next day. Of course, the Yankees would do a lot of the attacking, at least in the morning. We're going to pick this up tomorrow, where we're going to cover Spangler Spring. We're going to cover Culp's Hill, maybe East Cemetery Hill, and of course, what am I forgetting? There's another attack on July 3rd, isn't there? Pickett's Charge, or Longstreet's Assault, or the Pickett, Pettigrew, Trimble Assault, whatever you like to call it. I forgot I had these on. So everybody, thanks so much for being with us today. Thanks to Chris White behind the camera doing all sorts of yeoman's work. He's not here anymore, but thanks to Doug Adelman and to Dana Show for being with us, and for our perpetual guest, Chris Mackowski all day and Doug Douds for most of it. Thank you for joining us, guys. If you guys are enjoying this sort of content, you all watching, go check us out at battlefields.org. Get to know us, subscribe to our content via our emails, and maybe become a member. And thank you for doing so and for supporting Battlefield Preservation.